other players are black. She also says, Miss Hill does, that there's a lesbian factor here. I don't know anything about this. That many of the players, the WNBA, are lesbians and women of color. And Caitlyn Clark is straight and fairly...
What you're about to watch is not a basketball foul. It is not a hard play. It is not a competitive moment that got a little out of hand. What happened on national television inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse was a closed fist, driven directly into Caitlyn Clark's throat, while the referees stood close enough to feel the contact and did absolutely nothing about it. Not a whistle, not a warning, not even a sideways glance. And the woman who threw that punch, she then stood up, looked down at Caitlyn Clark lying on the floor, and stepped directly over her body like she was a piece of garbage on the sidewalk. The sports world has not stopped burning since that moment. Coaches are screaming into microphones. Podcast hosts are going absolutely nuclear. Fans are demanding that referees lose their jobs. And the WNBA front office is in a full-scale panic trying to contain a PR disaster that is already completely out of their hands. But here is what nobody is talking about yet. The real story is not just the punch. It is everything that happened after it. The suspension that had millions of people furious. The press conference that nobody saw coming. And Caitlyn Clark herself, standing in front of every camera in the building, saying exactly what needed to be said. Before we get into all of that, drop a 1 or a 2 in the comments right now. 1 if you think the WNBA completely failed Caitlyn Clark. 2 if you think this is all being blown out of proportion. We are reading every single comment, and this conversation is about to get very interesting. Let's get into it.
Derogatory statements, zeroing in on trying to break her. That happened. And here's how Ms. Clark reacted. Go.
When I walk out of the locker room, I shouldn't be not fearful of what the conversation is going to be, but, you just it's emotionally exhausting, it's draining, it makes your shoulders tense because, people don't want to talk about the basketball. They just want to stir it up and make it something else.
Okay, so Ms. Clark's been relatively classy about this. She has not made any accusations herself, as we can find. But this is around. There's no doubt about it. It's around. This from USA Today, extremely liberal newspaper, getting worse. Over the past few years, as women's basketball has exploded in popularity, much of the media and marketing attention is focused on 3 prominent white players. Clark, UConn page.
To understand just how badly things went sideways, you have to go back to June 24th and picture exactly what was at stake walking into that building. The Indiana Fever and the Phoenix Mercury were squaring off at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in what was already shaping up to be one of the most physically intense games of the entire season. Both teams came in with serious playoff implications hanging over their heads. The crowd was loud, the energy was electric, and Caitlyn Clark was doing what Caitlyn Clark always does, making the entire building revolve around her every single move. This was not just another regular season game on the calendar. Every time Clark steps onto the court, it becomes a national event. Television ratings spike. Social media timelines light up. Casual fans who barely follow basketball tune in specifically to watch her play. She has done something that almost nobody in the history of the WNBA has ever managed to do on this kind of scale. She has made the entire country care about women's basketball in a way that simply did not exist before she arrived. And that reality, that undeniable pulling power she carries with her everywhere she goes, has created a tension inside the league that has been simmering for a long time. Veteran players who spent years grinding in empty arenas, building the sport brick by brick, watching a rookie come in and immediately swallow all of the oxygen in the room. That tension has never fully gone away. And on the night of June 24th, it did not just simmer. It boiled completely over. The Mercury came out playing a brand of basketball that was physical from the opening tip. There was no subtlety about it. They were pressing, they were grinding, they were making Clark work for every single inch of real estate on that floor. The game was tight, the contact was relentless, and Clark kept answering every single time. She was putting on a masterclass under enormous pressure, making reads, distributing the ball, attacking the lane with the kind of fearless confidence that has defined her entire career. Then, with exactly 6 minutes and 52 seconds remaining in the second quarter, everything changed. Clark drove the lane, making her move the way she always does, reading the defense and attacking the open space. She made contact, lost her footing, and went down to the floor. In any other moment, in any other game, that would have been a routine scramble for a loose ball. Players go down. The game continues. You move on. But what happened next was not routine. It was not accidental. And it was not something that anyone inside or outside that building is going to forget anytime soon.
And yet so much of the discourse feels completely and totally unrelated to that. Do you feel that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is like, it's not always based in reality. I feel like media and journalism have a responsibility to tell the stories, and a lot of times, like, you guys are the ones controlling the narratives about what people read and what people talk about, and a lot of that is sometimes so far out of touch with what is reality, and that can be confusing to somebody that's 24 and trying to navigate life and trying to help her team win a championship.
Case in point, an incident like Alyssa Thomas, the foul. A foul happens on the court.
Yeah.
You move on, she moves on, and that should be the end of it.
100%.
So top down, what needs to be done so that that is?
It seems like there's always a moment like that in every season that I've played so far, and I think for myself, like, I just try to navigate it the best I can. It gets exhausting, it gets frustrating because...
When Clark hit the floor, Alyssa Thomas made 3 separate decisions in the span of just a few seconds. And every single one of them crossed a line that you simply do not cross in professional sports. First, Thomas drove her knee directly into Clark's groin area during the scramble. That alone would have been enough to ignite the conversation. That alone would have had coaches and commentators talking for days. But Thomas was not finished. As Clark was going down and completely defenseless on the floor, Thomas brought her closed fist directly into Clark's throat area. Not an open hand. Not an accidental collision of bodies in a chaotic scramble. A closed fist directed at the throat of a player who was already on her way down and had absolutely no way to protect herself. The footage is right there for anyone to pull up and watch. There is no ambiguity in it. Multiple camera angles captured it from multiple directions, and every single one of them tells the same story. And then came the moment that sent the entire internet into an absolute spiral. Thomas stood up, looked directly down at Caitlyn Clark lying on the hardwood floor, and stepped right over her body. Not around her, not past her, over her. Like a deliberate, calculated statement made in front of thousands of fans and a national television audience simultaneously. The referees were right there. They were positioned close enough to the play that there is simply no credible argument to be made that they did not see what happened. And yet the whistle never came. There was no foul call, no technical foul, no ejection. No review. The game just continued as if nothing had happened, as if a professional athlete had not just been punched in the throat and stepped over on live television. Indiana Fever head coach Stephanie White saw everything from the sideline in real time. The look on her face in those immediate seconds said everything that words could not. She was not confused. She was not waiting to see if a call was coming. She knew exactly what she had just watched, and she knew exactly what the officials had just allowed to happen without consequence. The footage spread across social media within minutes. Clips were being shared, slowed down, zoomed in, and analyzed from every possible angle by millions of people who could not believe what they were seeing. Former players were weighing in. Sports journalists were writing about it in real time. Fans were flooding comment sections, demanding to know how something like this was allowed to happen in a professional league, with trained officials standing directly next to the play. The answer that kept coming back from the officials? Silence. Complete, inexcusable silence. And that silence was about to make everything significantly worse for a league that was already walking a very thin line with its fan base. But the physical damage to Clark did not stop there. And what happened next, less than 60 seconds later, made the whole situation even harder to defend.
Never had a conversation. I get people have a job to do, but at the same time, like, don't make accusations about my character and who I am when you don't know me. I understand this is your job and this is your profession and this is what you get to do, and basketball is my profession and what I get to do. And the reason I play it is when I step in between the lines, I love it. And that's what's so fun about it for me is, like, I get to compete. This was always my dream, and nobody should ever try to take that away from me. Like, the love and the joy that I have for the game, and they haven't and they won't, because it's my goal to win championships, and I know that I can help this team do that, and that's always what I remind myself in the moments that, you know, things go downhill.
You have to be on the floor for those 17 games
Damn right,
in order for that to happen, both health-wise
Exactly.
and technical fouls.
Yeah, good point. I was thinking more health. I forgot about the technicals. Thanks for
So
reminding me
how
of
are
that.
you squaring that in your head? Because that is within,
I think
you.
it should be a great challenge for me to try to last 17 games without getting a technical. Unfortunately, I haven't got a single technical foul rescinded all year. But I think
Stephanie White did not wait for the post-game press conference to make her feelings known. She was vocal on that sideline from the moment the no call happened, and everyone in that building could see it. But it was when she finally got in front of the microphones, after the final buzzer, that she truly let loose in a way that sent shockwaves through the entire league operation. White stood at that podium and chose her words with the kind of precision that made it clear she had thought about exactly what she wanted to say and exactly how she wanted to say it. She called the lack of a call absolutely unacceptable. She used the word egregious and meant every syllable of it. She looked straight at the assembled media and asked the question that millions of fans had already been screaming into their phones for hours. Why is a generational talent being subjected to this kind of treatment, while the people responsible for protecting players on the floor turn a blind eye? And then she said the line that immediately went viral across every platform. The fist in the throat is crazy. It's crazy, it's dangerous, simple, direct, and completely impossible to argue with when you have watched the footage. There was no softening of language. There was no diplomatic hedging. White said exactly what the situation demanded, and she said it in front of everyone. The backlash from media personalities toward White came almost immediately from a very specific direction. Dan Dakich went on his podcast and ripped into her, accusing White of not doing enough to physically protect Clark on the floor during the game itself. He argued that a head coach has a responsibility to make it crystal clear to opposing players that targeting their star will not be tolerated without consequences. It was a harsh assessment, and one that a significant portion of the fan base either agreed with or pushed back against depending on where they were already standing in this debate. But White was not alone in her outrage. The next day, Indiana Fever team president Kelly Kroskov released a formal written statement that went directly after the league itself. Kroskov did not mince words. She stated explicitly that player safety needed to become the paramount concern for the WNBA front office, and that what happened to Caitlyn Clark on June 24th was a failure at the organizational level. A formal statement from a team president directly challenging the league's handling of player protection is not a routine event. That is a significant escalation, and everyone inside the league's offices in New York understood exactly what it meant. The front office was now being publicly called out by a team's coaching staff and its own executive leadership simultaneously, with millions of fans amplifying every word across social media in real time. The pressure was building rapidly, and the league had not yet said a single word publicly about what had happened on the court. That silence from the top was about to become its own massive problem, and the fallout was just getting started. Here is the part of this story that genuinely deserves to be told separately from all of the outrage and the media noise, because it is the part that reveals the most about who Caitlyn Clark actually is as a competitor. Less than 60 seconds after the throat punch and the complete absence of any call from the officials, chaos erupted again in the exact same area of the floor. Phoenix Mercury player Valerian Ai fouled Clark recklessly while she was in the motion of shooting a three-pointer. Clark came down hard and landed directly on Ai's foot. It was the kind of landing that makes every person in the building wince simultaneously. Clark was immediately seen on the broadcast grabbing and rubbing her back, clearly in pain, clearly feeling the impact of what had just happened. The beating she absorbed over those few minutes was not just a single violent incident. It was a rapid sequence of physical punishment that would have sent most players directly to the medical staff and off the floor without hesitation. A knee to the groin, a closed fist to the throat, a brutal landing on another player's foot that sent pain shooting through her back. Any one of those things alone would have justified walking off that floor. Together, they added up to something that the league was going to have an extremely difficult time explaining away. And yet, Caitlyn Clark did not leave that floor right away. She kept competing. She kept running the offense. She kept making reads, finding open teammates, and attacking a defense that had been physically targeting her all night long. She did eventually have to leave the game in the third quarter due to the back injury, and nobody in that building argued that she should have stayed out there. The damage had been done. But here is the number that makes all of this even more remarkable. In just 20 minutes of playing time, while absorbing a level of physical punishment that would have ended most players' nights in the first quarter, Caitlyn Clark finished the game with 19 points and 8 assists. On a night when the Mercury won by just 2 points, 111 to 109, Clark's output in limited time was still the most dominant individual performance on the floor. The sports world noticed. Commentators who were already angry about the officiating used Clark's stat line as further evidence of just how badly the league had mishandled the situation. The argument being made loudly and consistently across every platform was simple and brutally effective. The most valuable player in the WNBA right now was physically attacked on national television, forced out of the game with an injury, and still managed to nearly single-handedly keep her team competitive in a game they ultimately lost by 2 points. And the officials who allowed it to happen faced zero consequences in that moment. The physical toll on Clark was real, and it was documented. But the image of her continuing to compete through it, continuing to produce at an elite level while dealing with what had been done to her on that floor, only amplified the conversation that was already consuming the entire sports media landscape. And that conversation was about to get a whole lot louder. For roughly 24 hours after the game, the WNBA said nothing publicly. No statement, no acknowledgement, no indication that anyone in the league office had watched the footage that the rest of the world had been dissecting and sharing in an absolute frenzy since the moment it happened. That silence was not going over well with anyone. The pressure being applied to the league from every direction was enormous, and it was growing by the hour. Fans were organized and furious. Media personalities were devoting entire shows and episodes to the question of why the league was refusing to respond. Former players were speaking out. The story had crossed completely out of the sports lane and into mainstream news coverage, which is exactly the kind of exposure that a league administration does not want attached to a controversy it is trying to quietly make disappear. The WNBA finally moved. A full day after the incident, the league office reviewed the footage officially and released a statement acknowledging what had happened. They formally declared that Alyssa Thomas had committed a non-basketball act by recklessly making contact with Caitlyn Clark's throat. The original no call on the floor was upgraded to a flagrant foul 2 penalty after the review. And the league announced that Alyssa Thomas would serve a 1-game suspension, which she was forced to sit out on June 27th when the Mercury traveled to face the Toronto Tempo. The announcement landed like a match dropped into a room full of gasoline. For millions of fans, a 1-game suspension for a closed fist thrown directly at a superstar's throat was not discipline. It was theater. It was the league performing the bare minimum response required to technically say that action had been taken, while ensuring that the actual consequence was so light that it communicated something very different about how the organization viewed the severity of what had happened. The reaction online was immediate, widespread, and genuinely furious. Commentators who had already been critical of the league's handling of Clark's treatment throughout the season used the 1-game suspension as the final piece of evidence they needed to make their case. The argument that the WNBA has a systemic problem with how it protects its most marketable star was suddenly being made not just by dedicated fans and podcast hosts, but by mainstream sports journalists and television personalities who command massive audiences. The comparison to other professional leagues was made repeatedly, and it was not flattering to the WNBA. The question being asked loudly and consistently was straightforward. If this exact incident had happened in the NBA, what would the suspension have looked like? The answer that most people were arriving at independently was significantly more than 1 game. And that gap between the standard being applied to Clark's situation and the standard that exists in other professional leagues became the central argument in a conversation that the league's front office was desperate to shut down, but simply could not. 1 game for a closed fist to the throat. The fans were not done with this, and neither was Caitlyn Clark. When a story gets big enough to pull in voices from completely outside the traditional sports media world, you know it has crossed into a different category entirely. And that is exactly what happened here. Bill O'Reilly, the longtime political commentator with a massive audience of his own, dedicated significant airtime to the question of whether there is a deep cultural problem inside the WNBA that goes beyond basketball and extends into something far more complicated and far more divisive. His framing of the issue brought in commentary about race, about the demographics of the league's player base, and about whether there is an element of resentment directed at Clark that has nothing to do with her skills on the court. It is important to note clearly that much of what was being said in these media segments falls into the category of speculation and opinion rather than verified fact. O'Reilly and commentators in his sphere were presenting theories and interpretations of events, not documented conclusions. Voices like his suggested, without concrete evidence, that Clark's treatment may be connected to factors beyond competitive rivalry. These claims were and remain unverified, and they need to be understood in that context. What they did accomplish, regardless of their factual foundation, was expand the audience engaging with this controversy to an enormous degree. People who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives were suddenly watching clips, forming opinions, and weighing in loudly on a situation they had been introduced to through political commentary rather than sports reporting. Dan Dakich brought a different but equally intense energy to the conversation on his podcast. Dakich came at the issue from a pure sports perspective, but his language was just as direct and just as confrontational. He argued that the culture inside the WNBA has developed in a way that tolerates behavior toward Clark that would not be tolerated toward any other player in the league. He accused the league of allowing a targeting pattern to continue unchecked because of internal politics and interpersonal relationships between coaches and players that override the obligation to protect everyone on the floor equally. Clay Travis went further, stating on air that he believed WNBA players harbor specific hostility toward Clark because of her race and her sexuality, describing her as straight and more traditionally mainstream than much of the league's established player culture. Again, these are claims rooted in speculation and personal interpretation, not in verified reporting. But they were being said loudly by people with large platforms to audiences that were already primed to receive them. The layer of commentary around race and sexuality added an entirely new dimension to the controversy that the league was wholly unprepared to manage. The WNBA has a deeply complex relationship with its own identity. It is a league that has historically been championed by specific communities and demographics, and the sudden explosion of mainstream attention brought by Clark's arrival has disrupted the internal culture in ways that are still playing out loudly and publicly. What was clear amid all of the noise was that the media firestorm had taken on a life entirely its own, and no press release from the league office was going to contain it. Everything that had happened, the attack, the no call, the minimal suspension, the coaching staff's outrage, the media explosion, the league's delayed response, all of it had been building toward one moment. Caitlyn Clark sitting in front of the cameras and finally saying exactly what she had to say about all of it. She did not disappoint. In an extended press conference held in early July, Clark addressed the incident directly, deliberately, and with a level of composure that made everything she said land twice as hard as it would have coming from someone who was visibly angry. She looked straight into the cameras and stated clearly, without any hedging or diplomatic softening, that she did think what happened to her was a flagrant foul. That statement alone was significant. She was not accusing anyone of malicious intent in those exact words. She was not making broad character accusations. She was simply stating the obvious truth that she believed the play deserved a flagrant foul call, and that the officials who were standing right there failed to make it. That kind of direct, measured honesty from a player of Clark's stature carries enormous weight. She acknowledged, with what appeared to be genuine fairness, that officiating is an incredibly difficult job, and that referees operate under enormous pressure in real time. But she followed that acknowledgement immediately with the statement that needed to be heard by the front office above anyone else. Our reffing just needs to be better, and we really need to do a better job protecting the people in this league. She was not speaking only about herself. That framing, protecting the people in this league, was a deliberate and powerful choice. She was making an argument on behalf of every player who steps onto that floor, not just the one who happened to be the most famous face in the building on June 24th. It was the kind of statement that makes it very difficult for the league to dismiss or ignore without looking like it is actively choosing not to protect its players. But here is the moment that genuinely shocked people who expected this press conference to be all about Clark settling scores. Alyssa Thomas had spoken publicly in the days between the incident and Clark's press conference, revealing that she had been receiving horrific threats from fans online. Death threats, vicious racist abuse, and harassment being directed at her and her family. Thomas had also called out WNBA Commissioner Kathy Engelbert directly for remaining silent on the abuse her players were receiving from a fan base that had turned violent in its online behavior. Clark did not use this moment to punch back. She did not use Thomas's vulnerability as leverage. She looked at the media assembled in that room and she firmly, unequivocally condemned the harassment. She stated directly that the threats, the hate, and the targeting of Thomas and any other player were completely unacceptable and that it should never be a question of character. She drew a clear line between holding a player accountable for something that happened on the floor and the ugliness of fan behavior that crosses into real-world threats and abuse. That response did something that all of the suspension debates and podcast rants in the world could not do. It reframed the entire conversation around who Caitlyn Clark actually is versus the version of her that media personalities on both sides of this debate had been constructing in their own narratives. She had been punched in the throat, stepped over, forced out of a game with a back injury, watched her attacker receive a one-game suspension, and sat through weeks of divisive media coverage that made her the center of a culture war she never asked to be part of. And her response to all of it was to call for better officiating, stand up for player safety, and defend the dignity of the woman who had put her on the floor. That is not the behavior of someone who is a symptom of a problem. That is the behavior of someone who understands exactly what the sport needs from its biggest star and is willing to be that person even when it is the hardest possible thing to do. The WNBA has a choice to make going forward about what kind of league it wants to be. The attention, the ratings, the commercial interest, the cultural footprint, all of it has grown enormously because of what Clark brings to every single game she plays. Whether the league uses this moment as a genuine turning point for how it manages player safety and its own internal culture, or whether it allows the tensions that exploded on June 24th to keep simmering until the next incident, will define what the next chapter of this story looks like. One thing is certain, the entire sports world will be watching, and Caitlyn Clark will be right there at the center of all of it, competing with everything she has, taking every hit, and refusing to let any of it take away the joy she feels every single time she steps between those lines. Here is the bigger picture that nobody wants to sit with after all of the noise dies down. What happened to Caitlyn Clark on June 24th was not an isolated incident in a vacuum. It was the loudest eruption yet of attention that has been building inside the WNBA since the moment she entered the league. Talent, visibility, money, identity, and culture all colliding in real time on a national stage with millions of people watching and forming opinions about what it all means. The league handed down a one-game suspension and called it discipline. A coaching staff erupted. A team president filed a formal complaint. A media firestorm pulled in voices from every corner of public life. And through all of it, Caitlyn Clark sat down in front of the cameras and said what needed to be said with more class and more precision than anyone else involved managed to demonstrate. The real question is not whether the WNBA handled this correctly. It clearly did not. The real question is whether this moment becomes the one that finally forces the league to confront what is actually happening inside it before the next incident makes this one look small. Drop a comment below right now. Was one game enough? And do you think this league is genuinely changing or just managing headlines? Clark's spotlight is watching every move. Do not go anywhere.